Welcome to Week 2 of Magical Malevolent Michigan. As promised, we'll be taking a trip to some of the graveyards in Michigan and exploring some of the legends and lore surrounding them. With hundreds, if not thousands of cemeteries in the state hosting an untold number of deceased, is it any wonder that some of the residents may be, shall we say, a bit restless? First, we travel to William Ganong Cemetery in Westland, Michigan. It lies just a stone's throw away from the Eloise and the unmarked mass of graves we spoke about last year on the very same Henry Ruff Road. But this graveyard has a history scary in its own right. The land that the William Ganong Cemetery resides on was donated by a local farmer in 1832. It is often called Butler Cemetery due to the 20 or so members of the Butler family who have taken up permanent residence in its environs. There are several legends associated with the cemetery, but the most famous legend is about a ghost named Alice who haunts the cemetery and Henry Ruff Road itself. The cemetery lay dormant, or at least as dormant as cemeteries can be, for almost 150 years until the year 1980 when renowned psychic Marion Kuklo, known colloquially by her Wiccan name Gundella, explored the cemetery. She came upon a ghastly sight. What she thought was a blonde wig laying on the ground, upon closer examination turned out to be a human scalp. The nearby ground was littered with pieces of an old coffin and bits of white dress or perhaps coffin lining. Bits of bone poked through the turf. The only name legible on a nearby gravestone was Alice. Though I thoroughly searched the graveyard for this stone, I could only find one stone with the name Alice on it, and this looks like too good a stone in too new a condition to be the Alice that we're looking for. Although I suppose it shouldn't be a surprise that we couldn't find our Alice, given the state of the stone 40 years ago. The police at the time attributed this incident to wild animals, aided by heavy recent rains, digging up the coffin. But I have my doubts. This incident set off a spat of ghost sightings in the area. In a tale as old as time itself and resembling several urban legends, drivers passing the cemetery in this sharp curve would often see a figure shrouded in white appear in front of their car, forcing them to swerve and oftentimes crash. At least one car veered entirely off the road near the cemetery, killing the driver. There were many other incidents that, thankfully, did not result in death, and the curve has become known as the Bad Curve locally. Sightings of Alice have continued to this very day. Tales of grave malfeasance have been reported as recently as the 2000s when police found evidence of ritualistic activity in the cemetery. Next, we'll visit two different cemeteries in Belleville. The first, Pleasant View Cemetery, is more commonly known as Soup Cemetery after Abraham Soup, who donated the land in 1832. 1832 was a big year for cemeteries for some reason. The cemetery lies on Old Denton Road, which is famous for its haunted lore in its own right. The most famous legend associated with Soup is that of Elizabeth Soup, who was a self-proclaimed white witch. Indeed, her tombstone, which can be found toward the back of the cemetery, includes a spell as an epitaph, although the stone has since fallen and eroded to the point of illegibility. Although she was a white witch, rumors persist of a darker nature. Legend states that Elizabeth sacrificed local town children, was charged with murder, and was hung. This is highly unlikely. There are no records to indicate that any of this ever happened, and there surely would be something left in the official court documents from the time. In fact, her image has undergone some rehabilitation, as is evidenced by all of the offerings left at her grave. However, the recent change in image doesn't stop the unexplainable anecdotes. A former groundskeeper of the graveyard supposedly refused to clean her grave or the area around it as he heard a guttural growling noise and was supposedly chased away by mist that would mysteriously form whenever he tried. Others also report demonic orbs occupying the back of the cemetery. Still others report seeing a black, featureless figure roaming around the cemetery. Ask any local resident, and they're sure to give you dozens of legends involving unexplainable sights and sounds emanating from the cemetery. Some will even tell you that one of the victims of the co-ed killer was found in the cemetery, but they're wrong. Though not by much. The body of Jane Mixer was found in a cemetery in Belleville on Denton Road, but it wasn't Soup. No, her body was tragically discovered in Denton Cemetery. The co-ed killer murdered several college-age girls in Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, and Canton between the years of 1967 and 1969. Jane Mixer was a young law student at the University of Michigan. She had just gotten engaged and was going home to break the news to her parents in Muskegon. Not having a car of her own, however, she decided to hitchhike her way across the state. She never made it home. Instead, a young boy waiting for his school bus in front of this row of houses saw something strange in the graveyard. The strange thing he saw on that tragic March morning was the body of Jane Mixer. Her body had been left on the gravestone of William Downing. The killer had shot her twice in the head before placing her there, covered with her raincoat. Her shoes had been placed next to the body, and, quizzically, a copy of Joseph Heller's Catch-22 was also placed by her side. John Norman Collins, a student at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti, was arrested in connection with the co-ed killings in 1970. Though he was only convicted of the murder of his final victim, a fellow EMU student named Karen Sue Beineman, authorities were convinced he was responsible for the murders of 6 other victims, including Mixer. But, in a twist worthy of a true crime podcast, the advent of DNA evidence cleared Mr. Collins, at least of Ms. Mixer's murder. Oh, don't worry, he's still very guilty of at least Miss Beineman's murder, and police remain convinced of his guilt in the other murders, as well as a possible involvement in a series of murders in California. In 2002, however, the analysis of DNA evidence found on Ms. Mixer's stockings led police not to John Collins, but instead to Gary Leiterman, a nurse who lived in the area at the time. He was convicted of Jane Mixer's murder in 2005 based on the new DNA evidence, as well as the testimony of his roommate at the time. He remains in prison to this day. Finally, we have justice for Jane. While there are certainly many, many more graveyard legends we could explore, I think we'll leave it here for now, on maybe as upbeat a note as possible given the horrifying context of ghosts, witches, and murder. Join us next week for a bit of a different kind of magical Malevolent Michigan, when I'll be going to the Zoo Boo at the Detroit Zoo in Royal Oak. Until next time, stay spooky, Hartland.